Hello guys, this is a video that's being provided to help you with your first reflective essay. And I'm calling this 5-step process: develop and write a reflective essay. Now, this will kind of give you a good step-by-step process, and so let's get started with this. And we've talked about the reflective essays. You're going to write 3 of those, so it's an important assignment. It's a good way to get started in the class. It not only is an important assignment because it's a lot of the writing work in the class, but it's also a good way for you to get information that you will be able to use in more complex assignments. And you'll notice that on this slide, I'm paying a lot of attention to looking at the rubric questions. We're going to come back to those again and again and again. Rubric-driven assignments are very clear to unravel. You just simply need to look as closely as you can at the questions that are provided, and you need to answer the questions as directly as you can when you're doing them. Okay, here's the steps that I've developed. And I'm going to go through each of those, but I'll just review. I'll just identify them right now. We're going to identify a topic and read the rubric. We've already done that, but you know what to go back to. You need to do some background reading to acquaint yourself with the concept, which you can do by either reading the chapter in the text if you bought the text, or locating information on the internet about the topic. Okay, then 3, you're going to examine the nature and the quality of information that you have obtained. Is it good enough for your purposes? Do you need to continue the search? Then, when you think you've accumulated quite a bit of material, you're going to go back to the questions and use the questions to organize your reflective essay. You're going to write the draft, and you're going to submit it. So that's the process. So let's go back to the beginning. Okay, read the rubric questions. You'll notice there are 4 very simple things we need to do. Number 1, you need to know enough about the topic in order to write an accurate summary. And summaries are not easy to write, so I'll tell you that right now. You need to be careful about what you include and what you don't include. But that's the task you're going to work on. Okay, then you need to look for illustrations, an example of this philosophy in action. And we'll try to provide a couple of examples as quickly as we can, illustrations of the illustration, if you will. But again, it's like an idea of what's the philosophy in action? How will I know if someone is a, and then put the name of the philosophy in. Then we're going to compare and contrast the philosophy with some sort of an alternative approach, alternative philosophy. Now notice I said compare and contrast. It can be a favorable comparison, as in a comparison, complementing it, or it can be a contrast, something that's quite a bit different. And then we're going to ask the question about your primary sources. So let's get moving here. Here is a list, and certainly this is not an exhaustive list of some of the topics you could start with if you were going to write your first reflective essay. The top batch are all chapters in the textbook. I've given them to you in this context so you could actually use them as to go to a search engine as well. So if you don't want to, you want to get this information from the textbook. In other words, these are the things that the chapters are about in the textbook. But if you want to go someplace and look for them, here's the things. You could just take idealism or realism and use a search engine like Google to go search for it. Simple as that. But here are some additional schools of thought. We've already legitimatized Kaizen, if you've listened to the other beginning of class essays. Montessori is an educational program, preschool education, early childhood education, from the work of Marie Montessori. There are at least 3 Montessori schools in the Wichita area. Multiple intelligences. If you have a background in education, you'll know the work of John Gardner, and enough said on that. Effective Schools Movement. You'll hear a lot more from me in this class about the Effective Schools Movement, so I'll hold off on that. Suzuki Talent Education. Ever seen these little tiny kids, usually from Japanese, on little tiny instruments that seem to be playing the violin really well, and you wonder how in the heck can these kids do this? Well, there is a process, and it's called the Suzuki Talent Education Program. Perennialism, sometimes called the Great Books Movement. Progressivism, Reggio Imola is another education process, similar but not the same as Montessori. Social learning theory, Reconstructionism. In other words, lots of ideas. You won't be at a loss for ideas at all. So pick any one, and then we're going to go to the next process. Okay, so then if we go to there, now here's what I did. Now here's what I did, and let me show you what I did. I simply took, then I'll type it down for you. I simply took the phrase and I typed into Google pragmatism. It's pretty small on there, so let's enlarge it so you can see for sure what I typed in. There it is. That's what I typed in. Okay, and this slide and the next slide are the first 10 hits that I got when I got pragmatism. Now, we'll analyze it a little bit, but notice on this page, Wikipedia, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, the free Merriam-Webster Dictionary, another Internet Encyclopedia, the Pragmatism Library, which is another form of an encyclopedic process. Did you ever wonder why Wikipedia always comes first on the list? Well, in this listing, it simply comes up by frequency of hits. So lots of people use Wikipedia, but Wikipedia has some problems, and that will be the source of another lecture. But Wikipedia can never be a primary source of information. Okay, here's my other hits right here. Another dictionary. Okay, a little thing and that seemed promising called the Ayn Rand Lexicon. I'll look at that later. Another encyclopedia, and then found another online dictionary, and finally James is What Pragmatism Means. So those were the 10 hits. Now let me summarize those. Of the 10 hits that I got, 8 were direct listings from encyclopedias or dictionaries. In short, an encyclopedia or a dictionary can never be a primary source. The author is not identified, it's homogenized information, it's condensations. It's maybe good for you to simply get background information. In other words, if you had no idea what the term pragmatism meant, no clue, never heard of it before, reading the section in Wikipedia might be helpful to you. But that might be about the only thing you'd get out of it. I had one advertisement, because that's what the thing, I remember I told you I found this thing called the Ayn Rand Lexicon. That was an advertisement to get you to subscribe to something. And finally, one thing, I found one primary source document. And here it is right here. The 10th hit was What Pragmatism Means by William James. And here's what it looked like right here. William James, 1906, lecture on what pragmatism means. Okay, and then some information that's provided about it. Now, why do I know that's a primary source? Well, number one, I did my background reading as I'm telling you to do, and if I went back to Wikipedia or the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, I would have found out very quickly that this guy, William James, was a major figure in pragmatism before the turn of the century. He was a big wheel in pragmatism, so he's a primary author. Anything that William James writes on pragmatism is going to be primary source information. Secondly, they've already provided the documentation for it. In other words, I have a provenance for it. I know the source of it, I know what he did it, and also here's the good news for you. Look at this last thing. In the public, it's in the public domain. This text is completely free. In other words, if you go back in, independent of Wikipedia, for example, and you were to type in William James, What Pragmatism Means, you would get this document. And you would also get it if you hit on right here, What Pragmatism Means. So that will, I won't take that because it'll kind of disrupt the process here, but you go try that and you will, that's what you're going to get. Okay, now, what I've done is I've shown you the beginning steps. Now, so if you were doing pragmatism, William James would come to the fore as a primary author. But there are many ways to do that process. So if you did your search process, in other words, went in, did your search, got your hits, looked around, got some background information, and that's another thing that Wikipedia, for example, can be helpful to you is if you went to the section of Wikipedia where you asked the question, who were major contributors to pragmatism, you would come up with a list of names, pragmatic background figures, special sources on this topic, as you would on any school of thought that you went to. You would have come up with this guy's name, William James, and you would have then, if you started doing some hits, you would have said, aha, that name looks familiar, I need to go to that one. So where do we go to from here? Well, you've got some background information. We've given you one example. We told you why that's probably a document. Okay, so what do I need to do now to finish the process? Well, I need to continue the process. You need to answer the questions. You need to continue the research process. In other words, I've come up with one primary source. Would there be others out there? I'm sure you could continue the same process to find the other guys, some other guys and gals who would be primary contributors to pragmatism as in any other school of thought. Then you need to look at your questions and see, do I have enough information to do the writing? Continue the research process until you do. Write the draft, but making sure you're answering the questions. Submit the draft and use the feedback. As soon as you submit a draft, I'm going to give you feedback. The feedback is going to tell you how well you did in comparison with the rubric, and it's going to provide very clear examples of how you can improve it if improvement's needed. Now, you might, because many students do this the first time and they do it really well, and you may do the same thing, and if that's the case, congratulations, but this would give you one example of a completed reflective essay as required for this assignment. So give it a try, give me some feedback. Thank you.